Before we start the video, I want to say I apologize for the lighting and the noise in the background if you hear any kind of wind. We are technically going through a storm right now, and my ring light broke. It's kind of a cascade of badness that's going on this week. So not only did power go off in my neighborhood last night, but also I don't have the proper lighting equipment anymore other than this blaring one in the background over here, and it's really not enough. Today we're going to talk about making your own colored clay. It's actually really easy, especially if you already know how to recycle your own clay. If you do not know how to recycle your own clay, I suggest you watch this video right here. I will also link it down below. It's super easy. You essentially just need a bucket and a drill or even a whisk. I used to do it by hand for quite some time. And all you're really doing is saving up your clay scraps, making them homogeneous inside of suspension like water, and then drying them out on some type of dry surface, and voila, you have brand new clay. This actually came in clutch during the pandemic because a lot of clay stores were closed, a lot of places were shutting down, and I, instead of going to the clay store once every 2 months to get new clay, because I would throw my failures away, I would just recycle them on this slab that I also have a video if you want to learn how to make a slab right down here. So I really only go to the store for clay about once every 6 months if I'm being realistic with you. But along the way to recycling my clay, I learned how to make clay any color I want. Quite some time ago I made these for my website earthnationceramics.com, and they sold out relatively fast, but in making them plenty of people were wondering, how am I making marbleized clay black and white instead of brown and white, which is what people usually see who just mix some type of clay body with red iron in it and some type of porcelain together. And that usually is what people see when they say marbleized clay. They were kind of confused as to why I had black clay. My lord, look at how big you've gotten. You've been drinking your protein shake, I see. I'm kidding, the camera's just high. Don't think you're bigger than me. For anyone who has not seen the video on recycling your own clay body, the long and short of it is essentially that we get a bucket like this. We put our clay scraps, that being our dried trim, and even a lot of our slip in here from our throwing. We add a little bit of water, and we take something like a whisk or a drill, mixing it up, and making sure that everything is relatively homogeneous. Near the end of the process, it should have the viscosity of fairly thick pudding. If it's a little bit too thick, add more water. If it's too thin, make sure you get some more scraps, especially that of dried clay from your trim, and add it and mix it in. It's pretty easy to make this. This is called slip. After we've made this super thick slip, we take it over here to our drying slab, or for a lot of you, your wedging slab, and we put it right here. This is a plaster wedge block. I usually pour my clay on this, let the plaster take all the water content out of the clay body, and sooner or later I'll be able to pull this off, and this will essentially be brand new clay that I can wedge myself and keep cycling in and out of my work. Yeah, this is all good and fine, Donte. I already know how to recycle my clay. You taught me like 2 years ago. How do you make the stuff colored now? In the middle process of recycling your own clay body, you're going to end up with this super thick slip we talked about earlier in this bucket that you mix up either with a drill or by hand by adding water and bits of clay scraps together. In this stage, we call this slip. Now I've seen plenty of potters online get mason stain, much like this from the store. This is black mason stain, and wedge it into their clay body only to throw it and have pink and blue and yellow and brown clays come out, right? And that's fine if you're doing some kind of single use thing. But I thought to myself some time ago, there has to be an easier way to make a large portion of clay black. So I went to the store, bought some mason stain, only bought maybe a half pound of it at most, right? It doesn't cost that much. And so I thought to myself, if my slip is going to turn into clay after I recycle it and dry it out on my wedge, then why don't I just pour the mason stain into the slip while it's becoming new clay? This is now essentially how I make my black and white marbleized stuff, but in a much easier, streamlined way. The high majority of people who tell me to mix my clay with mason stains and whatnot will get a syringe and they'll mix it with their own porcelain, and they'll do this on a small level, and they'll put the syringe on something and they'll pound it and they'll swirl it, and I just want clay to be a different color from what it usually comes as. So I'm gonna buy some white clay and I'm gonna color it. But I don't wanna do all that work to wedge it in because my hands are soft and tired from crafting all day. So this became the next easiest thing, where I got my recycled slip and I just poured whatever color I wanted in.
Moments later.
Now this is the clay body a few days later after all the water has been absorbed by the plaster. And as I said before, you can do this with concrete, you can do it with wood, or most other absorbent type of platforms. But most potters choose plaster for our wedging tables and things of that nature. You can see that the clay body itself has become much more dry and ready to wedge. This is essentially the entire process. You rehomogenize your clay scraps in water, blend it up, and then put it on an absorbent surface. The only difference is we put a good amount of mason stain in this. So now that it's nice and dried out, we can wedge it a very small amount to make ourselves our very own black clay. Now I'm going to throw this for you and mix up with some white clay body to finish off the video, but do keep in mind there's about 3 or 4 different ways to do this exact same thing, except for the majority of the time most people get mason stain, open their clay body directly from the bag, and they wedge the mason stain into the clay body, which generally takes much more effort, and you essentially get one ball of clay that might have uneven distribution of the color, and it requires a lot more work. This way, I've homogenized all of the mason stain into one recycled ball of clay. This is going to be black all throughout. And at this point, you can redistribute your clay into other clay bodies in order to marbleize it any way you like. So what I often do is I will take some of my white clay and some of my new black clay that we just recycled and mix them together in different ratios so that they become one thing I can throw at a time. And now I have a really nice black and white clay body that I can mix realistically any color that I want. We just did black this time because it's the most contrasting color with white, and it's easier to see, but realistically speaking, you can do red, green, blue, and put a little bit more stain in there to get a deeper, darker color. But once I throw this right here, this, as a final product, is gonna end up looking a little bit like this, where the final product is a very nice, beautiful, raw clay body that I don't even have to put glaze on in order to catch the eye of any customers. This is fully fired though. The high majority of the time, if you do it right before you put it into the kiln, still in its bisque phase, it's gonna look a little bit like this, so don't panic if you get to this phase and you think it's not as dark as you want it to be. This is essentially the bisque version of what this is going to be in the fully fired glazed version. Well, thank you, Dirty Potters, for joining me today. You know, I get this question at least about once a week, especially on Instagram and Facebook, of people saying, like, I saw this one product on your store and I don't understand how you're mixing things that are colors that aren't just like white and brown, because my understanding is marbleized clay body only comes in white and brown, and you can very easily make your own color by just rehomogenizing all your clay scraps and recycling, and throughout that process, just adding whatever color you want in. Granted, using darker colors usually yield better results, using like a dark green or black or even a dark red if you're buying mason stain, so don't buy the light stuff, works way better than using something like yellow or even another white if you're mixing it with porcelain. It doesn't really have much of an effect on it. But I also wanted to show you my technique because I see a lot of other people doing this, and they often will get one batch of clay, much like this, and they will make one ball of clay by just brushing mason stain into here, sprinkling it, and then wedging this, and by the time they get the 5 pounds of clay, their arm's already burnt out. Why not do the entire bucket and just make as much of it as you want? And this is a very small batch, realistically. I still have the entire bucket that we mixed together right here. So guess what's gonna be on the website in about 3 weeks. Well, thank you for joining me today. Don't forget to hit all the YouTube buttons, and I will see you, Dirty Potters, next week.
Thank you for your patronage.